Hello everyone, welcome to Dr. Fluffy, and today in cleaning the litter box we're going to exactly see another example of doubling down from the regressive left instead of learning from the tragedies of Charlottesville. And of course, if there's a regressive thing to say, we can be sure that Riley will say it. So let's take a look at Riley's take on Charlottesville.
Last week, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, and KKK members held a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. On Friday night, they marched with torches and chanted the Nazi slogan, blood and soil, along with other racist chants. A group of counter-protesters were there, and they were completely surrounded by the Nazis.
We start off immediately with the misrepresentation of reality. Yes, you had KKK, you had neo-Nazi, you had all these terrible people from the protester side, but you also had normal people there. They were not all chanting those things. They were not all participating on the racism that did occur in Charlottesville. And in the other side, they were not just counter-protesters surrounded. No. They were illegal counter-protesters called Antifa and BLM. You know, two also bigoted, racist, evil, terrorist, violent groups that started violence against the protesters that until they started the violence were peaceful. Regardless of the racism and terrible things they were spouting and defending, they were peaceful.
On Saturday, the Nazis and the counter-protesters showed up again. This time, the Nazis shouted homophobic things like "fuck you, faggot." Many of them were carrying shields, guns, Confederate flags, and Nazi flags. Then
I haven't seen a single news that said anything about that "fuck you, faggot" thing. If they did, that it's a homophobic, really. I'm not sure. Would they call it faggot to a homosexual person, or would they call it faggot to, a regressive Antifa? Context matters, but that's not the point. Why were they armed? Maybe it was because all of the rallies that have been made so far by anybody have been interrupted violently by armed Antifa. So maybe they were carrying weapons to defend themselves. Because the police sure isn't going to. As we see, every time this happens, the police gets instructions not to interfere and to let Antifa do as they please.
one of them drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, injuring 19 people and killing one. Heather Heyer was murdered by a Nazi during a Nazi rally as she fought against racism and white supremacy.
Her death was tragic, but you know whose fault it is. It's people like you. It's people like the media that continue to push this narrative. You've called so many people Nazis that the world has lost its meaning. And when real Nazis appear, they appear because you allowed political violence to become something acceptable. When you close your eyes to Antifa, to BLM, you allow them to do this. You allow them to grow into this. And by the way, by what we know, that person that killed her was being attacked by Antifa when he ran away at full speed with his car and he hit those counter-protesters. So it's not that the counter-protesters were not doing anything. They started violence and they got violence back. And that's what happens when you get violence back. Things start escalating. Now, for what I know, this girl was not a violent protester. She was a victim, a side victim. She was a casualty of a civil war almost, caused by Antifa.
Immediately afterwards, Trump failed to condemn the Nazis by name. Instead, he blamed the violence on many sides. And I've seen a lot of people echoing that sentiment. When you talk about the murder of Heather Heyer, someone pops up and says, what about the violence that Black Lives Matter and anti-fascists have caused?
And they are correct in saying that, but more importantly is that her death was directly caused by the violence they started. If they hadn't go there, those people would have said a lot of racist shit. Everybody would have looked. These people are terrible. They would condemn their actions and it would be over. No violence. But they went there and started violence. They are responsible almost as much as the guy who killed her.
But the problem with that is that it's drawing a false equivalence. Violence is inherent to Nazi ideology. The belief that white people are superior and that they have to take back their country from people of color, that ideology gets people of color killed.
if there's any false equivalence, is that white supremacy and all of these things that you're so afraid of have not caused the same level of violence that Antifa and BLM have caused in the past years. That's where the false equivalence is. Everywhere that Antifa is involved, they are masked with weapons, hurting innocent people, and just because they can think they can label them with all of these names that you call these people. And the people that normally they target are not Nazis, they are not white supremacists, they are not racist, they are normal people that have different political opinions than them. These people are anarcho-communists. And by the way, communism is as bad, even not worse, than the Nazi ideology. Do you want to counter the death and suffering caused by communism during history and even in today's time?
There is no way to peacefully be a white supremacist. The very nature of the ideology is violent and harms people of color.
You say that because the examples that you think about history immediately, yes, they were violent. So you do that connection, but that doesn't immediately say that the two things are completely obligatory. But more important than that, then what you do is that you are actually racist against white people. Because again, this concept of people of color, when you immediately do this, you are being racist. Because you're dividing white people and people of color, two sects, when there's so many different colors, so many different races. White is a color. Any type of supremacy ideology is bad. Feminism, that is a female supremacy ideology, is bad. BLM, that is a black supremacist movement, is bad. If we had a yellow supremacist movement, it would be bad. By the way, again, for example, the Latino classification. I'm a Portuguese person, so I'm actually the real Latino. But probably people like you would call me white. So again, there's not this white people versus colored people thing. You people are the ones who create that, and then you bring the white supremacists back because you're the one dividing classification like that.
Black Lives Matter, on the other hand, is an organization that states very specifically that its goals are to end violence and discrimination against black people. Their official website says, Black Lives Matter is working for a world where black lives are no longer systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. That is
First of all, they are not intentionally targeted for demise. That's of course a false narrative. And they use that false narrative to attack and be violent against white people and police officers. What they are is a black supremacist movement that uses terrorist tactics, and they are a hate group, by the words of Sheriff Clark himself.
completely antithetical to the purpose of white supremacists. They are not two sides of the same coin.
Actually, they are. No matter how much you sugarcoat it, they are.
Nazis believe in white superiority and in the eradication of people of color. Black Lives Matter believes in black people being treated fairly and equally in society.
No, they don't. They put up articles saying that white people are defective because they don't have enough melanin. They put up articles saying that all white people need to die. They kill cops. They kidnap white people and then torture them for days. Remember that handicapped kid? They do riots and then they say things like, beat that white boy up, make him pay for my shit. They take people from their cars and beat them up because they voted Trump.
Are there people who commit violence and claim association with Black Lives Matter? Yeah, sometimes. But those people do not represent the organization. They don't act in the values of the Black Lives Matter organization. In any large enough group, someone will commit violence. What matters?
You are committing a no true Scotsmanship fallacy. No, these people are inspired by what BLM defends, and you have leaders of BLM defending these things, and then they don't go and condemn the violence that people do in their name. They don't. They basically applaud it.
As if that group's ideology promotes that violence. In 2016, when a black man shot and killed 5 white police officers, the Black Lives Matter movement immediately condemned it and said that they call for an end to violence. But
No, they didn't. Some did. Because most actually continued committing violence over and over and over. If BLM was this great movement that you are saying, they would not pass false narratives about police officers unjustly shooting black people, and they wouldn't accept those false cases being used as examples to fuel their hateful movement.
After Heather Heyer was killed, Chris Cantwell, one of the leaders of the Unite the Right rally, said that her murder was justified. In fact, in 2014, when 2 police officers were murdered, Cantwell said that their deaths were good news. During the Unite
Yes, these are horrible people, but just because these are horrible people does not make all the other people less horrible. One bad does not make the other good.
the Right rally, he said, "We're not non-violent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to." And afterwards, he said, "A lot more people are gonna die before we're done here, frankly."
But it was Antifa and BLM that made this thought process acceptable, because this is what Antifa basically also defends. You know, Antifa were the ones who started the political violence. They started the idea that it was okay to use violence to silence political ideas and to win political debates. And now this is what you get.
The Black Lives Matter movement has always been nonviolent and has always called for an end to violence.
Now that is false again. And except for Antifa, BLM have been responsible for more violence in the past 2 years.
Beyond who condemns what, though, you can't look past the fact that the goals of white nationalism impede on the rights of other people. They want a white ethno-state. That means forcibly deporting or killing millions of people of color. They quite literally advocate genocide. There's no way to do that peacefully. However, you can easily peacefully advocate for an end to violence against black people, which is what Black Lives Matter fights for.
Again, yes, white supremacy is terrible. We need to stop it. But Black Lives Matter, again, no, that's false. They do not want to end violence. What they want is free shit from your country. They want white people gone. They want power. They want black supremacy. That's what they want.
And in regards to anti-fascists, they're harder to pin down because they're not an organization with leaders like Black Lives Matter. But I will say this, violence against fascists is not the same as violence used by fascists.
Yes, it is, because the people they use their violence against are not fascists. Most of the time they are not fascists. This time they were fascists because they allowed the fascists to grow. But before they would use that violence on anyone who disagree with them by just calling them fascists. If I, for example, called you a fascist, would it be okay for me to beat you up without any proof that you were a fascist? Of course it wouldn't. But that's what they do.
Anti-fascism is not fascism. The thing is, we can all agree that not all violence is equal. That's why we have laws that allow for self-defense. Sometimes violence is not justified, sometimes it is. I think that's something most people agree on. If someone tries to kill you and the only way you can protect yourself is to be violent towards them, you have every right to do so. Now that's
what you're doing here is actually justifying the violence that alt-right, the Nazis, the KKK used, because they were the ones that used violence to protect themselves from Antifa's attack. Antifa are the ones that go to rallies, to peaceful rallies, and attack people for just speaking. So then when people go violent in self-defense, yes, that's not as bad as the Antifa that start the violence.
easy to see in an individual scenario. If someone pulls a gun on you, you can feel justified fighting back. But on a large-scale societal level, that violence against you can be as simple as calling for your eradication.
No, because those are words. Words do not hurt people. It's actions that hurt people.
You can argue all day that words are not violence, but the Holocaust didn't pop up out of nowhere. It started with words. It started with the vilification of certain marginalized groups, and then it grew.
It started by an ideology very close to your social justice. You know, it was not a marginalized group. Jews were not a marginalized groups. They were a so-called privileged group, like you call white people a privileged group. If we compare Nazi Germany's ideology before the Holocaust with social justice and the regressive left, we'll find a lot of parallels. And by the way, SJWs and the neo-Nazis too, you both do the same mistake, that is to believe that Nazism is a right-wing ideology. It's not, it's left-wing. It was the National Socialist Party, it was socialism. So basically you're proving both the same level of ignorance, and it's funny. If you want a part 2 response to the rest of Riley's video, I'll do it, but I think I had enough. It's ridiculous. It's excusing violence. It's excusing two dangerous ideologies by saying, oh, this ideology is bad, so these are good. But no, they are both bad. These are all bad ideologies. These are all terrible people. And if you excuse one, you will excuse them all. You cannot say that you are against political violence while defending political violence. And I'm sorry, but you can't. That's terrible. It will only make things worse. I hope to see you guys next time. Tell me what you think in the comment section below. Stay fluffy!